what I loved about the reaction to that moment on social media. Some guy had written on Twitter, 5 minutes ago I didn't give a shit about iguanas, now I'm crowdfunding to build them to build them a bridge. It's a great example of a story arc, because the iguana starts off in a bad place, born on a beach full of snakes. He runs, he's free, he escapes the immediate danger of a snake coming up behind him, and then is caught, and all is lost, we think, until he wriggles free and escapes again and makes it up the rock. Now this, going from bad to good, is actually its story crack. It is it makes what makes stories addictive. Now what's really interesting is business clients I work with want to tell one kind of story. Starts off good, gets better and finishes brilliant. Right? And the trouble with that story is it is literally too good to be true. We just don't believe it. And then there are other people, some of my friends, when they talk about Brexit, for example, everything's bad, it's getting worse and it's going to end up shit. We also don't like those stories. We positively avoid those stories. So story arcs are really key. And the reason why they work is because they have a beginning, middle and end. They have a linear progression that helps us understand what's coming next. There's a great study on why stories work, and the author says our minds exist to predict what will happen next. That's why we have such enormous brains, to try and work out what is going to happen next. And stories are the simplest way we've got of predicting what happens next, because they have beginning, middle, end. They have good and bad. They have heroes and villains. They have a structure that we all understand from childhood. Therefore, we use them all the time to try and work out what's coming next. So, let's do a little test. I want you to try and predict what happens next in the case of a woman called Linda. Now, I want you to imagine, I'm going to describe Linda, and I want you to imagine what she looks like, okay? So, Linda is 31 years old, outspoken, single, very bright. She majored in philosophy. She's American. As a student, she was deeply concerned with discrimination and social justice. She also participated in anti-nuclear demos. Has everyone got a picture of a Linda in their mind? Can you all see a Linda? Okay. What I want to know is what happened next after she left university. Where is she now? Okay, so what happened next? Is it more likely that A, Linda works in a call centre, or B, Linda works in a call centre and is an active feminist blogger? Which is more likely, A or B? Hands up for A. One person nearly okay, hands up for B. You're not allowed to sit on the fence. Okay, good. Okay. That's pretty typical to most of the groups I work with, that kind of, 90% for B. Let's look at Linda as a maths problem rather than a story. So this is the pool of all adult women in Ireland. So let's say there's 1 million, 1.5 million. This is the pool of women working in call centres. Let's say there's 100,000. Yes? That's the pool of active feminist bloggers. Let's say there's 50,000. Oh no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many there are. That pool represents those who are both working in call centres and active feminist bloggers. Yes? It's a Venn diagram. You remember these from school? Okay, so if you put your hand up for B, you think that Linda is in that group there. Whereas if you put your hand up for A, you think she's in that group there. Right? Now I'm going to ask you to put your hand in your pocket, get out 50 euros of your own money, and put a bet. Which do you think is more likely? Linda is A or B? Anybody want to change their mind? Yeah, okay, because it's a probability question. It's a maths problem, and it is never more likely, never, ever, ever more likely that somebody is one thing and another compared to being just one thing. Yes? In maths terms, it is impossible for that to be more likely. Yet in story terms, why did you all go for the most unlikely option in the story? It's a better story. It's got a happier ending. Yes? Just working in a call centre is boring. It's a defeat for the feisty Linda we all knew. We wanted to have a happy ending. One guy I did this test with in RTE said, yes, well, I voted A, but only because as people get older, they get more conservative, and I thought she might have turned into a Tory as she got older. So he got the right answer, accidentally, by telling a different story. He'd actually got the right answer. He hadn't worked out the maths. Now, what's interesting is we're not really that good at maths. Quite a few people in the room claim to be analysts. But as soon as you put something to people in terms of a story, once upon a time there was a woman called Linda. As soon as you get it in story terms, actually the bit of your brain that does probability and maths and logic kind of switches off. Goes, okay, we can sit back now. There's a story. So story takes over. And in story world, you're looking for a happy ending. You're looking for a satisfying ending all the time. You're looking for right and wrong. You're looking for good and bad. And just working in a call center is a boring ending. Yes?
Also, she was a liberal kind of activist.
Yes.
So doesn't make sense. Like, she won't do anything on the side.
She might, yeah. But she could still be working in a call center and she might just not be a blogger. She might be a wannabe politician. We don't know. The point is, that's irrelevant to the mathematics. The maths is very clear. Sometimes this provokes really fierce arguments. And I get told that I'm being really unfair to Linda, right? And I have to say, she doesn't exist, right? she's just a maths problem. Okay.
But there's additional information there we could use or not use.
Correct.
And obviously, the human brain looks
Yes.
to use that as much as possible.
We do, of course we do. We're trying to fill in the gaps the whole time. The minute you give somebody a little bit of information, they rush to fill in the gaps around it. And they use all kinds of prejudices and biases and experiences to fill in those gaps. So what you need to be aware of when you're telling stories about yourself or your work is every time you leave a gap, people are rushing to fill it. And if you don't get there first, they'll fill it with stuff regardless of whether you wanted them to or not. Right? And they will make up a story. If you don't give them a story, they'll make one up anyway. So it's your job to think, what story do I want them to come away with, and give it the best version you've got. Otherwise, they'll just fill it in anyway. And you'll be surprised what they think about you. Okay, right. So I've been banging on about story. What are the basic ingredients? I think there are some basic ingredients that every story has to have. If it doesn't have them, it's not really a story. I think they are these. They are that. A, stuff happens. Secondly, people care. And thirdly, there is a moral of the story. This is what you need if you are going to use stories to talk about your work, to talk about innovation, to talk about your process. You need these three basic ingredients. Otherwise, you are not telling stories and nobody's going to remember what you said. They probably won't even listen in the first place. So let's take these one by one. First of all, stuff happens. We are talking about real people doing real actions in real places at a real time. Now, almost always they tend to be in the past. We say, okay, so for example, but they could also be in the future. But they've got to be, still, even in the future, real people, real place, real action, just happening in the future. Okay, so this is essentially the who, what, where, and when. So when you were at school, you were told this is what stories had to have, who, what, where, and when. They also have to have beginning, middle, and end. Remember, stories are about helping us predict what happens next. So beginning, middle, end is that very common structure. Every story has it. Aristotle pointed that out 2,500 years ago. You'll hear people say things like, oh, I met this woman, or last week, or and then, after that. These are little verbal clues. When you're listening, people are telling you a story, okay? Because stuff is happening. Already, that sets you apart from most guff that's written on corporate websites. Because most guff on corporate websites is about values and abstracts. So already, by talking about stuff happening, you are getting away from that guff, back into the real world. Okay, secondly, people care. And this is the bit that a lot of people leave out of corporate stories, of stories about work. They leave out the emotion, and they think they have to because that's professional. And they're wrong. You don't have to leave out emotion. In fact, if you leave emotion out of your story, you are inviting people to ignore you. You're inviting people to forget what you said. Because emotion directs our attention. It directs our attention to things going on around us. It also fixes stuff in our memory. And I'll guarantee you that the last time you went to bed and couldn't sleep because you were really wound up about something to do with work, it was at heart emotional. You were anxious about letting somebody down. You were frustrated that somebody else had let you down. Yes? These were emotions that were keeping you awake, rather than we're 0.5 over our budget. Okay, maybe, yeah. All right, it was emotion that kept you awake. Tell you another story. This is not my journalism story. This is somebody else's. There's a guy called Ross, who is an environmental journalist from a long way back, writing about the environment. And he covered a conference in the 90s, I think, which was about overpopulation. And it's very gloomy, very depressing, very serious about the rising population of the world and the crisis this was going to bring to us all. And he was looking for an angle, looking for a hook that could get a more general audience interested and give it a bit of hope. Then he realised that one of the academics on the platform was herself pregnant. And he said, this is fantastic, to himself. He said, she's found personal hope in the midst of all this doom and gloom. Overpopulation, but yes, she has enough hope, she's bringing a new life into the world. So it's ironic, it's hopeful, fantastic. He made that the kind of the hook for his story. It goes in the national papers. The next day he gets a call from the academic who says, I'm not pregnant. Okay. Has anyone ever done that? Has anyone ever congratulated a woman on being pregnant and she's not? Oh, come on, I have. No one else done it? Oh, God. Was that a hands up? Yes, I have. Okay. Right. Now, what's interesting about that, two things. First of all is that even though this didn't happen to you, you felt a flicker of that shame and embarrassment on his behalf. Yes? So this is a third-hand story. I'm telling you someone else's story and you feel a little bit of his pain. Yes? So we have these mirror neurons in our brain that respond to what we see around us. And emotion is a very powerful trigger for them. So if I describe an emotion to you, particularly if I describe how it happened, and there's a bit of shock value as well, you feel it too. You feel an echo of that emotion. And that's what sinks it into your memory. It's what gets your attention. So emotion is incredibly powerful. You should never leave emotion out of your story, ever. So you need to go looking for it sometimes. As journalists, that's what we always did. We went looking for the emotion in the story. Yeah? How do you feel about that? So how do you feel? With a constant emotion, with a constant journalistic refrain. How did you feel about that? Because we needed people to talk about their emotion, because if they didn't, nobody would remember what they said. How do other people feel? Are we talking about happy, sad, ashamed, proud, frustrated, relieved, angry, vindicated? For every negative emotion, there is a positive mirror. You don't have to be always doom and gloom and anxiety and worry and fear. There's hope and positivity and optimism and all these positive emotions too. Use them. Use the emotions. So you'll, again, the verbal clues you'll hear from people, it felt, or we were so. People will offer you these emotional cues. If they don't offer them, you just need to ask, just dig a tiny, tiny bit, and they will come. The emotional cues are really key. I'm going to come to emotional cues later, because I think they can really help you when you're thinking about your innovation process, looking at your own emotional dashboard, for want of a better phrase, and see what emotions are bubbling under in you or your team could actually point towards things going on in your innovation process. So as journalists, we only had to dig very shallowly to get the emotion to come to the surface. As researchers doing ethnography, doing audience research, doing user research with customers, again, this is gold dust. You get people to tell you how they feel. Yeah, okay, you get it. Finally, there's a moral of a story. If there's no moral to your story, you are just chatting. Nothing wrong with chatting, but it's not very useful business time. If you don't just chat to clients, well, you do, obviously, but there's some point when you're telling a client a story, there's a moral to the story. And the moral is, why does this matter? So what lesson or action do you want people to take as a result of hearing your story? What impression do you want them to go away with of you? Okay, so the moral of the story is really key, because we learn through stories. Every story has a moral. If you don't nail the moral on explicitly, people will read one anyway. It might not be the one you wanted them to read. So it helps to nail it on. You'll hear people say things like, I realised. So ever since then, okay, this is them indicating to you that they have learned something from their experience. This, for them, is the moral of the story. If they don't volunteer it, you can ask them, so what did you learn from that? Right? Nobody will ever say nothing. I learned nothing. Because that's not how we're built. We are built to learn the whole time. All you have to do is invite people to reflect on what they've learned, and they'll tell you. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of examples of the way that a big brand uses stories. And there's two types of story they tell. And I think this is really interesting, particularly for those of you who are working with clients, working with startups, working with other businesses, to think about the way people tell stories. And I'll ask you to reflect on the stories you work on yourselves. So the first one is a story from 1984. It's the first TV advert this company ever made.